Few words about our speaker, Everett Fritz. Everett is a leading expert in your ministry and small group discipleship. He's founder of Andrew Ministries. He speaks all over the country, but he's based in Denver. He has a master's in theology from Augustine Institute with an emphasis in catechesis and evangelization, and a BA in theology from Franciscan University at Steubenville with a minor in pro-life studies. He's the author of 4 books, including The Art of Forming Young Disciples. Everett's been a part of several platforms and venues, including the National Eucharistic Congress, NAPA Summer Institute Congress, Formed, EWTN, Catholic Cancers Live, and many others. I guess I learned something about him as he just got a big deal with the Melbourne Archdiocese, and he's headed to Australia here fairly soon. So very interesting. Anyways, for those of you that have kids between the ages of like 15 and 35, Everett's a great resource, and really interested in hearing what he has to say tonight. And with that, let's say Everett Fritz.
Thanks, Rick. I'm really blessed to be with you tonight. I know that Chris Stefanik was advertised, and I just want to let you know in advance, I am nowhere near as dynamic as Chris Stefanik. I don't think anyone on the planet is as dynamic as Chris Stefanik, but I'll do my best. A little bit about myself. So I'm the founder and president of a ministry called Andrew Ministries. I'm a huge advocate that the way we do youth formation in the church is ineffective, obsolete, inefficient, needs to change. And so that's where I spend the vast majority of my time in my work. And because of the work that I do, one of the most common presentations that I give in front of a general audience, and where I was speaking at the National Eucharistic Congress, is the topic of why young people are leaving the church and what we can do about it. And just so you know, like, young people are leaving the church, and all the stats are bad. We are at a point right now. I was just talking to a member of the board of directors with Focus, who's a data analyst, and he said, we're losing people in the church and not filling back in, meaning we're losing more than we're gaining. And when we lose people, we lose them young. On average, like over 80% of the people who leave the church do so by their 23rd birthday. And he said, I've done the math just on crunching the numbers based on where things are headed. And most of us who work in this field can tell you that a cliff is coming. And he said, look, just doing the math, like institutionally, the institution of the church, like most of our schools, our parishes, etc., they cannot sustain the rate at which we're losing people. He says we're looking at institutional collapse between the year 2060 and 2070. So, that's gloom and doom. There are lots of signs of hope, but this is where I spend the majority of my time. If you have interest in that, we'll talk more afterwards and such, because that's not what I'm talking about tonight. But because this is the work that I do in the church, and in terms of talking about young people leaving the church, one of the things I can count on is that anytime I give a presentation on young people leaving the church, there's a line of parents at the end of the presentation who want to talk about their adult children or their grandchildren or somebody that they're very close to that they love who has left the church. And usually there's this almost look of despair in their eyes of like, what do we do? And I get it. Like, we love our children. We want what's best for them. We want more than anything for them to come to Christ. And so this was a conversation I was having with Wick a few months ago. And we were just talking, and I said, let me give a presentation to Legatus on just, here's what I would tell to an individual parent if your child has left the faith, on what you can do. Now, a couple of disclaimers I like to put out there. Number one, it should be a foregone conclusion. I'm not going to talk a ton about intercessory prayer tonight, because that should be a foregone conclusion. If you're not praying for your children, who is? There is no one who should be more motivated to pray for your children than yourselves. And so we all know the story, most likely, of St. Monica and her son Augustine was an incredible sinner who was sleeping with a concubine and had children out of wedlock, and it was just partying all the time, and she prayed him back into the faith. And I think sometimes those of us who are parents, we forget the fact that what makes that story so amazing is just how far gone Augustine was. And so when you're in these time periods of like, our children are gone, they've left the faith, they're doing things that we don't want them to be doing, we want what's best for them, you could say like, I'm praying and I'm praying and I'm praying, and why isn't anything happening? Because it takes a long time. Pray, don't give up on prayer. I know for a fact, my mom texted me right before this presentation. She just happened to do so. She said, just want to let you know, like, praying the rosary for you tonight. And I know, like, my parents pray the rosary every night, and I know that I always get at least the third decade of the rosary that's devoted to me and my intentions. So, I mean, pray for your children. That should be a foregone conclusion. Second disclaimer I want to put out there, because I know that there's always, like, I can count out, there's one person in this room, I'm guessing, who blames themselves for their child leaving the faith. And I want to just, for that one person, I want to just say it's not your fault. You parents love your children. And every parent in this room, I'm willing to bet, has done the best that they possibly can. I'll be the first to tell you, I'm not a perfect parent. If you are a perfect parent, if like all of your kids have become like amazing Catholics and amazing children, and they have amazing children of their own, you should be giving this talk up here tonight, not me. So, introduce yourself to me afterwards. I'd love to pick your brain a little bit. But there's a reality, like parents, we all do the best that we can. And you have to respect that the Lord has a journey for your child. Something that I remember asking a parent in our parish, that all of her adult children, like she has 2 adult children that were focused missionaries, one that was in seminary or a priest or something, and like other adult children that have these amazing Catholic families. And I pulled this mom aside and I said to her, I was like, okay, what did you do? Tell me, what did you do with your children that they all ended up these amazing Catholic young men and women? And she said the most profound thing I've ever heard from a parent before, best advice I've ever heard. She said, I had to come to grips with the fact that it was okay for Jesus to be their Savior. Meaning I had to let them sin, I had to let them struggle, I had to let them question, I had to let them walk away, and I had to trust that Jesus was going to chase after them faster than anything I could do as a parent. And in fact, in most cases, she's like, my efforts likely would have gotten in his way. And so, that's a really important principle to kind of keep in your mind as we get into this tonight, is that, look, parents, we all did the best that we could. And their story, your child's story, is not finished. Case in point, my sister, so I have 2 siblings. Both of them were raised Catholic alongside of me as well. Both of them left the faith, and I'm the golden child. So my parents are devout faithful Catholics. They go to daily mass.
My mom was one of those who languished in particular over my sister leaving the faith. And I finally, my mom is not, she's Greek, okay? That's probably all I need to say. She's Greek, and and she's not like, subtle in the way that she talks about things. So she would overwhelm my sister with, you need to get back to church, which was just driving my sister further and further away. And I finally pulled my mom aside one day and I said to her, I was like, Mom, do you want Veronica to go back to church? Do you want her to return to the faith? And she says, yes, more than anything. I said, great, I have a plan for you. I don't want you to ever again speak to her about the faith, ever. And my mom's like, why? And I was like, you have to understand that, what you were talking about and the way you're talking is just driving her further away. I was like, Mom, gosh, I'm a professional. Let me do it. But I wasn't that arrogant to say that much. But I was like, look, you have to let her take her time. And sure enough, it took 15 years. But last year, my sister started going back to the faith and got all of her kids baptized in the sacraments. And that's a whole story about how she came back. But it wasn't through my mother that she came back. It was through Christ chasing after her. So it is very true that we have to respect the journey that our children are on. And it's something that I've discovered. So I have 3 kids, 17, 14, and 12. And I carved out this beautiful path for their life. I had all kinds of plans for them about how we were going to raise them in the faith and what we were going to do. And none of them have followed in any way, shape, or form the track in which I have carved out for them. So, like, our 3 kids go to public schools. Don't judge me. And so we went to Catholic schools. That was the path that I wanted for them. We ended up in public schools, and sure enough, they have found faith through channels and means that I did not expect. So I like to liken like evangelization, and if you want to be effective in participating in the work of evangelization, and I really mean participating in. There's a movie that I saw years ago. It was called Now You See Me, which the premise of the movie was like magicians meet Ocean's 11. It was like magicians who rob banks and give away all the money, and they're magicians. And it sounds ridiculous, but somehow it works. Like, it's actually a decent movie if you can get past the premise of it. In the movie, I will never forget this anecdote that one of the police officers who was investigating and kind of learning about the magician community, he told a story. He says, there's a story of a magician named Lionel Schrank who is legendary in the magician community. And the way that he became legendary in the community is he once did a trick where a man came to his town. It was like a prominent politician or an important person, and he did a card trick with him. And the purpose of the trick, so he had the man sign his name on a card, and then using sleight of hand, he made it disappear, or he did a few tricks with it. But the purpose of doing that trick with the man was not to impress him with sleight of hand. The purpose of the trick was to get his signature on the card, because he had a greater plan. To wow the world with his magical ability. And so the politician left and had long forgotten that he'd signed this card. And so the magician, he took the card and he stuck it in the knot of a tree. He actually put it in a glass case, put it in the knot of a tree, and he left it there for 17 years. And he just over the course of 17 years, this tree grows around this card in a glass case, and it becomes enclosed within the tree, growing inside of it. 17 years later, that same man comes back to the town, long having forgotten about this magician and the sleight of hand trick, and he says, can I do a card trick with you? And using sleight of hand, he has him pick out the exact same card that he picked out 17 years ago. He has him sign it in the exact same place that he had 17 years before. He made it disappear, and then he said, your card is now growing in the inside of that tree. And they cut that tree down, and everyone was astounded to see inside of a glass case, wrapped in vines, wrapped within the tree, his card with his signature on it. 17 years he waited to see the payout of that trick. Now, the conversation I had with my mom with regards to my sister is I said, you need to come to grips with the fact that it might be your funeral that is the first time Veronica comes back to church. I said, and it might be your funeral that brings her back. You might not see it in your lifetime, but know that Jesus is chasing after her. See, the work of evangelization is very much a process. I love Curtis Martin. I know that he's spoken here at Legatus. Curtis, I'm guessing he's given the same talk that he's given like everywhere, where he does, did he do the everybody tap a person on the shoulder and then stand up and then you tap them to show like how fast the gospel can spread? The one issue I have with Curtis's example, and some of you are looking at me puzzled, like, go see Curtis sometime. He'll do the talk. He has people like tap another person on the shoulder, and another person taps another person. He's like, if everybody shares the gospel with somebody, 2 new people each year, he's like, we'll conquer the entire world in, I think it was like 17 or 20 years. And I said, yeah, but there's one problem with that example. You don't spread the gospel to a person in a year. It takes a lifetime with some people. So what does walking with a person throughout their life in faith look like? I want to give you a sense of the temperament of the Messiah. And really like why young people leave the church. The reason why young people frequently leave the church, there was actually a study done by the USCCB and the National Federation of Catholic Youth Ministry where they partnered together on a 3-year process to have conversations with over 10,000 young people in the United States. And they studied this group, and they talked to young people who were practicing their faith, young people who'd grown up Catholic and left the faith, and young people who were not practicing anything. And over the course of these 3 years and 10,000 studies, they compiled a report known as the National Dialogue. When it came to young people who had left the church, what they said frequently, or what they said, page 78 of the report, is that we kept hearing 2 themes come up over and over and over again. We found that they did not believe church teaching, which we expected. Otherwise, why would they have left? But what we were surprised by is just how well catechized they were. He says, we assumed they didn't believe church teaching because they didn't understand it and they didn't know it, which, by the way, is a huge myth of faith formation. The idea that our faith is self-evident, that if people simply understood it, it would be self-evident to them why they should follow it, which is not the case. They said what we kept hearing from these young people over and over again is that they were well catechized, they could articulate the teachings of the faith to us, but we heard 2 things. One, we felt like there was more to be said. We wanted someone to dialogue with, someone to converse with, which requires a relationship with a person so that they could struggle with and ask questions and challenge so that they could understand and comprehend and assimilate. But the other thing, and they said we kept hearing this over and over and over again, is we never saw it lived. The moral teachings of the church, they saw hypocrisy everywhere. The prayer life of the church they heard discussed, they never actually saw practice. The sacramental life of the church wasn't in their family homes in many cases. They never actually saw it lived. And that's the thing with Christianity and Catholicism in particular is in order for it to make sense, like the very concept of passing on the faith, though, in order for it to make sense, it has to be seen in order for it to make sense. Like that's actually the theme and the concept of discipleship was that a rabbi would invite a small number of people to live with him, and the idea was that those disciples of the rabbi would learn from his way of life. And so it's not just that the 12 apostles, for example, who were the disciples of Jesus, that they learned from his instruction and his teachings, but rather they also learned from the way that he brushed his teeth, the way that he folded his clothes, the way that he told a joke, the way that he had a prayer routine. They learned from his way of life. And then in the apostolic age and the early church, when these apostles went out to places like Corinth and Ephesus and Philippi and Rome, and they founded Christian communities, they would live in those communities for years so that the early Christians could observe their way of life, which they got from Jesus. And so this is the way that Jesus, I'm a big believer that Jesus didn't just give us the message of the gospel, he also gave us the method. And so the idea is that the faith has to be seen in order for it to be lived, which is why relationships are so important. So then, coming back to this, what does walking with someone back into faith look like? I want to give you a sense of the temperament of the Messiah, because Jesus was perfect at this. Talk about walking with. God went through the trouble to become man to walk with us and to walk us back into his into kingdom, back into covenant with him. What was Jesus' temperament? I'll tell you this. Jesus turned the world on its head. We know that. If you look at the way that he handles lepers, this is very much the mindset of Jesus and the mindset that you have to have in order for evangelization to be effective. In the time of Jesus, like leprosy was such a contagious and deadly and bad disease that they forced lepers to live in colonies with each other and not be around the rest of the people. And if you were coming close to a leper, the lepers had to shout at you, "Unclean, I'm unclean, stay away from me." And so the idea was like if you were to touch a leper, you would become unclean yourself. And so everyone wanted to stay away from the lepers as much as possible. Jesus turns this on its head. He actually approaches the leper, he touches the leper, he embraces the leper. But instead of him becoming unclean, they become clean. Instead of him catching their impurity, they receive his purity, and it restores them to health. Why is that significant? Because Jesus does the same thing with sinners. See, the number one thing that I see that drives me up the wall is when Christians love to stand back and stay away from the lepers, stay away from the sinners, point at them and shout, unclean. This isn't what Jesus does. He enters into the world of sin. He embraces the sinner. He touches the sinner. He loves the sinner. He forgives their sins. And because he does so, he makes them clean. See, there is a willingness that he has to enter into the life of someone, even to the point that he's willing to go into the messiness of their life and walk with them. Jesus' story of Emmaus is really famous because after his resurrection, on the road to Emmaus, there were two travelers, and they were leaving Jerusalem, and they were talking about the things that had transpired, all the rumors that were going around of Jesus rising from the dead, and his followers were saying that they had seen him. And they're walking away from Jerusalem, and they come upon Jesus not realizing that it's him. And he starts walking with them, and he walks with them and converses with them. And what I find really fascinating about that story, of the story to Emmaus, we know that they end up in Emmaus and they find him in the breaking of the bread. When they break bread together, they realize that it's him, and then he disappears. They're going the wrong direction. God has been spotted in Jerusalem. Everything that had happened up to that point was in Jerusalem. They're walking away from Jerusalem. They're leaving and walking away from God. And so what does Jesus do? He walks with them the wrong direction. It's the temperament of the Messiah to enter into the life of people and say, I'm even willing to walk with you to the point of walking with you in the wrong direction. So there's like a patience and a temperament that is necessary to say, like, I'm willing to enter into the life of somebody who has left the faith and walk with them. Now, here's where you as parents, this is where this comes in, because no one is in a better position or better situated in a person's life to walk with them than you. No one. No one loves your child more than you. You love them unconditionally. And because of that, you can give witness to the unconditional love of Jesus. And so the best advice I give when I have parents that line up and they talk to me like, what can I do for my kid? What do I need to tell them? What do I need to bring them to? What do I need to say to them? I just say, you need to love your child unconditionally and walk with them. Don't worry about talking about the faith. In all likelihood, Jesus is going to send that person, and it's not going to be you. You have an opportunity no one else has, which is to walk with your child, even if they're not in your home, even if they're an adult, and to walk with them, even if it means them to death and your own funeral, and that's the moment that Jesus decides to reintroduce himself along the road. Like, that's the best advice I can give to parents is don't worry about the teaching, don't worry about the message, don't worry about the sin. Worry about being the unconditional love and support for your children. Pray for them, and Jesus will work with that. That is the greatest thing you can do. I'll give you a story here to wrap up, and then we're going to open for Q&A. But my father-in-law was an atheist when I met him. He's an engineer. He's an intellectual mind. Wonderful man, good man, very rational person. I started dating his daughter at 17. We were high school sweethearts. And then he picked us up from the airport, both of us, when we were coming home from college, my freshman year after one semester of college. I'd been studying theology. And we had a 3-hour car ride from the airport back to our home. And I really believe that it was out of like boredom or needing to make conversation or something. But he started to ask me questions. And I was 18 years old with one semester of theology. Like I was not like well equipped for this conversation. But my wife was, honestly, because of her relationship with her dad, she was too close to the relationship. She knew. She actually told me after this car ride, she said, you're going to have to convert my dad because I can't do it. And I was like, deal. So I was like, I don't know, I'm 18. Who knows what's going to happen here? But we had this amazing conversation about God, and he peppered me with questions. And you know, I did the best I could to answer them at 18 years old. I've never in the 22 years that I've known my father-in-law, ever, even though I work for the church, brought up faith or religion with him, ever. Every 2 or 3 years, I can count on it. It's almost like clockwork. He comes to me and he starts the conversation this way. He says, remember that conversation we had in the car? He says, I have a few more questions for you. And we picked the conversation right back up. And what was interesting is like he went from atheist, in between one conversation to the next, he went from atheist to agnostic. Then he went from agnostic to believing in God, but just as kind of like deism and such, to eventually saying, I remember it was a few years ago, we were on vacation together, and he said, I want to get you a drink, and he says, I want to pick that conversation back up for you. I have a few more questions. And this was like 20 years later. And the questions were, explain to me the Holy Trinity and transubstantiation. And I was like, oh my gosh. Thank God I have a theology degree. I'll do my best. But, so we discussed it. And I asked him, I think at that point, I was like, where are you at right now? I said, so when I first met you, you were an atheist. He's like, oh, I'm a practicing Catholic who believes in God, who struggles with some of the basic teaching. I was like, fair enough. We're getting there. What's fascinating. So he, in November, was told his heart was working at about 15% capacity. He was in heart failure. And they said, you have about 6 to 12 months to live. And he deteriorated pretty quickly from that time period on. And I sat down with him at one point, and we picked up the conversation. It was a short conversation, but I asked him, I said, he hadn't received sacraments. He was a baptized Catholic. He hadn't received sacraments probably since his confirmation. So it had been well over 50 years. And I said, are you interested in receiving sacraments? Like anointing the sick, last rites, reconciliation, Eucharist? He said, yes. And so for the first time in 50 plus years, we had a priest come to the house. He gave a life confession. I received the Eucharist for the first time in 50 plus years, received last rites. Told me afterwards, I was like, so how did it go? He's like, I feel better for some reason. Like, it took him his entire life to get there. He passed away 2 weeks ago. And actually we had the funeral this morning. So right of Christian burial, the Lord welcomed him into his kingdom. He got there in the end. Funny enough, that's how his parents came into it. It was a deathbed conversion for his parents as well. It's like it runs in the family or something. But it was like, it doesn't matter. He was a good man, wonderful man. I benefited from him in so many different ways. And at the end of the day, it's like the Lord opens his kingdom and welcomes him in. And it didn't matter if he was struggling the entire life to come to grips with whether God exists, who God is, what he loves him. He got there in the end. That's the goal. There's a reason why God gives us a lifetime. And it takes a lifetime to come into faith. I would say, you can meet Jesus in a minute. It takes a lifetime to become a saint. So, I mean, if there's a piece of advice I could give you and something I can leave you with, and I'm happy to talk over there at the table where I'm selling books. So I'm happy to talk with anybody, and we can just talk about yourself and your own family situations, etc. But it's like, pray for your children, love them unconditionally, take the journey with them, and walk with them, and be patient, and let Jesus be who he is, which is their Savior. Amen? Amen. Wick, how do we do Q&A?
Just Q&A, open it up.
Oh, okay. Q&A, open it up. Go ahead.
So you said children are leaving by the age of 23. Why?
Oh.
So many leaving by the age of 23.
Why are young people leaving? Oh, gosh. If you wind me up and get me going, I'll talk all night long on this. So if you talk to adults in a room right now, and if I were to ask you, why are young people leaving? What you will hear in this room is typically, it's because of poor catechesis, it's because of the culture, it's because of the breakdown of the family, it's because of all of these different things. And there's truth to each one of those things, but that's not why young people are leaving. If I were to summarize it in one sentence, because there's a variety of reasons, but if I could give a one-sentence summary, it's because their basic needs in the church are not being met. Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you meet the needs of a person, they move to a point of self-actualization. And so if they never get their basic needs met, they never move to that point. So for our purposes, self-actualization is they have decided that this faith is their faith, not their parents' faith or the priest's faith or the catechist's faith. It's their faith. According to Maslow, if their basic needs aren't met, like needs like being understood, finding a sense of belonging in the church, being able to be transparent, being able to engage in critical thinking, receiving guidance, like those are basic needs. If we don't meet those needs, and the church is not meeting those needs, they never move to that discipleship point. What it took for my sister to come back, super basic and easy. Her kids, she has a son that has special needs, autism, low functioning, etc. He was getting bullied at the public school. He went to the Catholic school, and they welcomed him with open arms. She went to the Catholic school out of desperation. She was like, well, I grew up Catholic. Let's see if we can find another school. And they welcomed him with open arms and like rolled out the red carpet for him and met every single one of her son's needs. That's all it took. She's like, okay, we're getting my kids baptized. We're getting back into the church. We're at Mass every Sunday. Like, that's all it took. I cannot tell you how many people I've spoken with that have said, I left the church simply because I didn't feel welcome. It really comes down to it's more basic than we give it credit for. I do a lot of work in this area. I can tell you what we're doing to change it, but that's a side conversation. So I hope that more or less that answered your question. Other questions? Yeah, in the back.
You talk about, you talk about kids and you have that long-standing relationship with them and get the approach there. Talk about colleagues that you work with. How do you propose the faith to your colleagues? They know you're Catholic.
Yeah.
They know some basic things, but they're atheists or they're agnostic or they're whatever. How do you propose that without overdoing it?
My favorite G.K. Chesterton quote. So if you didn't hear the question, it's like, how do you evangelize colleagues, essentially, without overdoing it? My favorite G.K. Chesterton quote is, he said, Christians do everything differently. They stand out, so much so that they even climb a tree differently than the rest of the world. Like, what our world is suffering from more than anything in terms of Christianity is lack of Christian witness. And really, like, you have to, like, I remember when I was in high school and I just caught fire in my faith, and I started working at a local department store. And I was working with a young man who was homosexual, and the manager was worried about putting the devout Christian on the same shift as the homosexual. We became great friends. Like, we got along great. And part of it was, like, very quickly, everybody knew, like, oh, this is the Christian and he's non-judgmental. I didn't talk to any of them about faith. They brought it up. And they brought it up because the way I was living my life was self-evident. This is just a funny story. My assistant manager at that store, I was like a freshman in college at this point. She was an atheist. And I remember, like, we were closing up shop. It was just me and her. And she had lost a check. This was back when people still paid with checks. So I'll give you an idea of how old I am. But she had lost a check, and she was like, everything's not balancing. I lost a check. It's a large check. Somebody paid. She's like, oh my gosh, Everett, pray to that God of yours. And so, no, I kid you not. And so I was like, all right. And so I just, right in front of her, I prayed a prayer. To St. Anthony, by the way. And then I picked up the tray, because we were all looking everywhere. I picked up the cash tray, and it had been stuck underneath, like attached to underneath the tray. So I literally picked it up over my head, and it just released and fluttered right down in front of her, right at her feet. And she looked at me and she said, okay, that was pretty good. Right? I kid you not, like, the best way to evangelize colleagues is be a Christian, let your life be the thing that evangelizes, and let them get curious, because they will be the ones who actually bring it up when your life is a witness to them. And sometimes it takes years, honestly, for them to bring it up, but, like, even just, like, people will ask, like, why are you so joyful? And that's an opportunity to say, well, it's because of Jesus in my life. That's why I'm joyful. The way in which you live your life is a witness to others. Let them bring it up. By the way, if they never bring it up, then maybe you got to reevaluate how you're living your life. But sorry, just an aside to that. Like, people used to say about Mother Teresa, I never met her, But they used to say about Mother Teresa that 5 minutes in a room with her would change your life because she would look at you with such great love. I heard this of John Paul II as well, but she would look at you with such great love that it would like transform your life, that you would question everything in your life and you would just like give your life to Jesus just by the way she looked at you. 5 minutes in a room, change your life. You've spent like an hour and a half in a room with me right now. Nobody's life is changed like Mother Teresa can change your life. I still have a ways to go, right? But that's just the reality. Like the more your life becomes a witness, the more people get curious. Other questions? Wick.
So you mentioned, I mean, you kind of diminished the effect that our society has on the walking away from the faith aspect, and I find that hard to believe. Like, you look at our society right now; it has to be having an effect.
Oh, sure. Well, okay. So he said, it's like, come on, the culture's got to have some impact. I always look at culture and just say that's the mission terrain. And the mission terrain changes. So you can look at the culture and say, the culture's going to hell. That's got to be impacting people. Yeah, but honestly, like the culture's been going to hell for thousands of years. Like Satan's been at this for thousands of years. And yes, it keeps getting worse. But I got news for you. It'll be worse 10 years from now than it is today. Like that's to me, like I look at the culture and just say, okay, this is the terrain. That's the mission territory. A missionary, like I said, wind me up and get me going. A missionary, like their approach to the world, if they're going to be successful, is to enter into a culture, gain its trust, and then slowly use what people value in the culture to preach and to evangelize. They don't go into a culture and say, you need to change the culture. For example, like this is when I train ministry leaders, I give this example because cannibals and young people are not that different from each other. So I say, imagine that a tribe of cannibals is discovered on a deserted island that nobody knew existed. And so the church, taking seriously the call to go out and evangelize, sends missionaries to that cannibal tribe. And so in getting to the chief of the tribe, the missionaries say, hey, the way you're living is sinful and wrong, and we have a better way to live that was taught to us by Jesus, who they've never heard of before. And we are going to set up classes for you to learn about our faith in a language that you do not understand. And we're going to teach you our liturgy and our prayers, which have no significance or meaning for you. What's going to happen to those missionaries if that's their approach? They're dinner. Like as the spice rack is getting lined up behind them as they're talking to the chief tribe. But that's not, see, a good missionary, their goal is not to go into a culture and immediately change it. Their goal is not to become dinner. Their goal is to be invited to dinner. And in doing so, you get the trust of the culture, you learn their way of life, you learn their language, and then you take what is true and good and beautiful. And every culture has discovered something that's true and good and beautiful. And you start there. This is quite literally what Jesus did with humanity. He became one of us. He learned our way of life. He learned our language. And then he taught us in ways in which we would understand. So when I say, hey, the culture is yeah, sure, the culture is driving everybody to hell. Like, shocker, that's just the terrain and the territory. We need missionaries to go out into that terrain, not to lament it. I get tired of people saying, the culture is. You're not gonna change it. So go evangelize it. Go enter into it and witness. I'll talk all night, guys. Yeah, are we good? I'll hand the mic over to you, Wick.
Great, thanks, Everett. I think we can all identify with what Everett was talking about tonight, whether it's our brothers, sisters, nephews, kids, whoever it might be. But anyway, really a great talk tonight, Everett, and appreciate you. And Chris Stefanik has nothing on you. So, anyways, thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night, and we'll see you in June. Everett, we do have something special for you.
Oh my gosh.
We'll mail it to you.
I'd like to thank
That's the dummy.
the little people.
So
Thank you so much.
yeah, great job.
So you want to tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, and Everett will be back at the table with his books, so pay a visit to him and ask him any questions that you have for him.
I'm going to go to the table.